It's my pleasure to introduce today's topic of discussion, as well as our illustrious speakers. The fact that so many of you have joined us today is a real testament to the high level of interest in this important topic that is often overlooked in our hectic daily lives. This pandemic has thrust all of us, that's the entire world, into crisis management mode. Every day, sometimes multiple times a day, our entire executive team here at WIS jumps on video calls to digest and quickly translate ever-evolving government policies and incentives. We formed an internal task force to mobilize around our clients' cash flow crunch concerns, launched a resource center to simplify all the tax updates, and are assisting with emergency relief loan applications. We will continue to do our best to mitigate the negative impact potential on our clients' businesses, but the one pervasive topic that continues to come up during these internal discussions, whether through firsthand accounts or shared news stories, is the enormous emotional toll that this pandemic is inflicting on all. So we are here today producing this event to openly address anxiety and depression. We want to help our employees and our clients. We want to help our friends and families. We're everywhere to better cope with this heightened level of stress. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our featured speakers. First, I'd like to introduce our host, Paul Peterson. Paul is the managing partner here at WIS, and I would say more than ever during this crisis, Paul has been a true champion of embodying our WIS mission, and that is to inspire the confidence that is needed to achieve desired outcomes. We certainly can all use an extra boost of clarity, confidence, and stability right now, and I thank and recognize Paul for his leadership. Paul is joined by our expert guest speaker, Dr. Nick Molinaro. Dr. Nick, as we affectionately call him, is a licensed psychologist with 35 years of experience specializing in executive performance enhancements, clinical counseling psychology, and sports psychology. Some of you fellow golf hackers out there might recognize Dr. Nick from his regular appearances on the Golf Channel. Aside from leaving you with deeper insights and stress management coping skills, I truly believe Dr. Nick will imbue you with a sense of comfort with his warm and humane presence. So with that, please welcome Paul Peterson and Dr. Nick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for those kind words, and thank you for all of you who are joining us today. I've had the great pleasure of being a good friend of Dr. Nick, a patient, and he's also been an advisor to us for a number of years now. So it's really reassuring to all of us that we have your guidance and counsel today to hear from you and get your viewpoints as to how you can help us through this crisis. We've often referred to Dr. Nick as Yoda, so we'll be asking for some of your Jedi tips tonight. But I wanted to start off just with a sense of how you would express the way in which we're feeling right now. Some reassurance about the fact that this is definitely happened so abruptly. There is a great deal of uncertainty. We're all trying to find a common ground, but it's shaky. We all feel a little imbalanced, and just kind of looking to you as to how should we be feeling right now.
First of all, Paul, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be here today. Everybody is probably going through this experience unprepared and with some degree of anxiety, and we would certainly call that normal anxiety. So we can begin there, I think. Anxiety is described as a diffuse feeling of disequilibrium, and it's usually brought about by two basic factors. One is not knowing what could happen. We're just unprepared. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. The other, sometimes anxiety gets exacerbated by kind of explaining that that there's a disproportionate probability of something happening when we really don't know what the answers are. So when we're looking into the future, we don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes we're escalating it by telling ourselves things that are not true. that it
Right.
might actually become worse than it actually is.
So what type of mindset should we be working on right now while we're trying to find that balance and adapt to this level of uncertainty that we have today?
We're going to give some tips about that mindset, Paul. And if we look at this as an opportunity to excel with the use of our minds differently than we've done before, I think it's a mindset that we'll describe as a growth mindset. We can be looking into the future with an opportunity to handle the stress that we're under now and come through this in a way, in a much better way than we could have before. Perhaps we should start with some of the images and explain part of
Yeah,
what's going on with our.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So the first thing I'd like to help us understand is that this is affecting our brain, not just our mind. So our brain is the organ and our mind is the function of it, not unlike the function of the pancreas is digestion. So we want to be looking at what's going on in our brains. And here we have a picture of a PET scan, and this is showing heat of the brain. Now, we don't feel heat in our brain because there are no heat receptors there. But in a PET scan, we're actually taking a look at what's actually happening on the left side of the brain. Now, under stress, we start to think about things that are upsetting to us. And when that occurs, it moves over to the right side where the emotions are. So anyone who's experiencing anxiety, fear, anger, frustration, depression will have some changes that are taking place in the brain. So when people say it's all in your head, literally it's all in your head. And this is what's happening to us right now. This is the way our brain is supposed to look, nice and blue and green.
Right.
And we can modify these kinds of responses partly by what you said, Paul, about a mindset. If the mindset allows us to look into the future and shift our attention to ways of being able to reduce stress, I'll give you some techniques about that, or look into the future as the opportunity to come through this. And we'll talk more about bonding as we go forward.
Okay, that was helpful. So how would you, define or differentiate between healthy stress, bad stress, and anxiety?
Well, stress, again, is a diffuse feeling. It changes our basic functioning. And stress will actually modify our immunological system. There's some very profound studies and results that have showed us that protracted stress will not only influence brain functioning, but it can also influence your heart. Now, stress can be good stress. Stress is something that's not usual. It's an atypical response to what's going on. So things that are familiar to us are not stressful. Things that are not familiar to us are stressful. So if you've been to Disney World, either as a child or as a parent or a grandparent, you could find that stressful, in spite of the fact that's experienced as good stress, right?
Right.
So we're going to be looking at the negative stress, and we're going to be looking at anxiety and the impact that anxiety and depression can have on the brain.
So what are some of the things? So right now, I think the hardest part for all of us that have gone to this remote working arrangements where we're continuing to have to find that rhythm around performance. We still have jobs to do. It's kind of ironic in a way that we're isolated, but we are at the same time with a number of people daily within our households or our apartments, or whether we have roommates, children, spouses, whatever that may be. So yeah, we're isolated, but we have many different distractions and people we have to care for, et cetera, which is causing a lot of stress. So how do you try to separate and find that more relaxed brain, if you will?
Well, let me bring up two other images and then give you some more answers to this. So the first image I'm going to be showing you is what happens when we are not focused on the moment and we're focused too far into the future. Although I've used this in my performance psychology and sports psychology to look at performance from low to high, the ZOF is the zone of optimal functioning. And what we notice down here is as a person becomes more what's called aroused or psyched up, for doing your work or spending time with families, looking forward to the future. As you start to increase your arousal level, your performance goes up. As you start to become more anxious, your performance drops off. So if you're in the moment of doing what you need to do, which is called process focus, like if you have work to do, you should be thinking about what you have to do in the moment, compartmentalizing the time spent with family, doing your work, exercising. As you start to set up a schedule for yourself, you're going to perform at a much higher level than if you start thinking of all the things that have to take place well into the future. So we're becoming anxious about what's going to happen with our jobs. You
Right.
know, what's going to happen with our work. You know, the
Yep.
pressure that any employee has or a leader has now is, are you going to be able to maintain the level of performance when you're not around your peer group, when you're not interacting with people and having the support of one another? When you're at home working, you might even be concerned about whether someone's watching you with how much work you're doing while you're at home. It feels almost like a big brother now that most people are doing, you know, telecommuting and
Yeah.
even telemedicine.
Yep. Yep.
So we want to always stay kind of in the moment, right?
Right. Which, that brings me to just an interesting part here in terms of the different emotions, right? So if you think about, you have stress, you have anxiety, you have worry, you have now this worry that extends into not only your health, but could potentially be that financial strain and that stress and what that is doing, again, to a number of families right now that are isolated, are trying to deal with that uncertainty as it relates to how are they going to, continue to provide security to their family. And I think as leaders and people that are running businesses, it's very stressful because we don't know what's to come. We don't know how deep, how protracted, how wide this will be. We know it's going to not be pleasant, but I think we're all trying to plan for that scenario. But it's almost as though if you look too far out, you can make it worse by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the problem with kind of looking way into the future. Some of what you were explaining can be, you know, exemplified in this picture here. And I like to use the model of stress is a cumulative and progressive condition. If you imagine your mind as a container, and into the container, instead of this kind of smoky image, we're going to imagine now different colors of fluid that are being poured in. And each of those fluids represent the different stressors in your life. So red might represent COVID-19, and blue might represent finances, yellow might represent what's going to happen in the future. Green might represent what's going on with the rest of your family and some of the things that you're missing. And what you can see from this is that as there's a morass of things that are going on then, and as a result of that, it all kind of comes in a co-joined fashion into your mind and actually into your brain. If we don't compartmentalize those by coming up with very specific areas that you need to focus on by scheduling yourself, actually scheduling time to think about, what do I have to do today? If I'm going to pay any attention to the future about the finances, I'm going to spend 3 minutes on that today. I'm not going to spend 3 hours on that.
I see.
Paul, we've had this discussion before. There are about 80,000 thoughts a day that the human has, 80,000 thoughts, about 2,500 to 3,000 thoughts an hour. And so you can imagine if 60 to 70% of those thoughts are negative or anxious, you're going to feel overwhelmed.
Right.
And that's why we saw what was happening in the brain functioning.
Right. Yeah, that's a great, I like that. That was something that you really helped teach me was it's okay to have that thought. You could almost have a thought that you take and you catastrophize it and you extend it, but it's just a thought. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to be real.
Right.
And the other thing around that, I think that was very helpful was it limit the amount of time you're doing that. Yes, you can do that and have these what if moments, but you don't want it to be that you're having those what if moments all day long.
Yeah. Well, I use the metaphor of breathing and thinking. Just as you breathe and you breathe without thinking about it, and you have about 16 respirations, a minute, I could ask you to hold that breath and then you can breathe again. Well, thoughts are like you're breathing. They just keep going on and on and on unless you stop the thought. So just as you hold your breath, you can hold that thought. It's a very interesting metaphor. You can control your thinking just like you can control your breathing.
Yeah, I like that. So right now, when you do have this sort of buildup, right, of stress, of uncertainty, I guess the feeling of anger starts to pop in too. And what recommendations or how do you sort of give us advice as to how to best deal with that anger that may be rising up in us as we deal with this?
Well, anger is a cumulative process, not unlike stress. So one and one is not equaling two. So what happens here is that there are many factors that influence anger. Frustration is one, helplessness is another, being hurt is another. And probably one of the most profound processes that affect anger that we're not aware of is fear. And a lot of what's going on right now is fear and anxiety, which is leading to this experience with helplessness. The antidote to anger is always empowerment. That's why you find people, not, they come home and maybe kick the cat versus kicking their boss because they have a sense of empowerment by doing that. People will do things or say things, and that's one of the ways they get that their anger. But a very effective strategy in dealing with anger is letting go.
Right.
Letting go is a very effective way of controlling our anger. Every day, your body eliminates waste. And just as your body eliminates waste, your mind can do the same thing. Letting go of those things, postponing thinking about negative thoughts, postponing thinking about the future. If you tell yourself not to do something, you're going to do it. If I said, Paul, don't think about pink elephants, what are you thinking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Pink elephants.
Yeah. So when you tell yourself not to do something, you cannot not think about that. So we like to do things like giving yourself permission. I'll think about what's frustrating me or what's frightening me later. Try to be in the moment, and we'll do this with some mindfulness exercises maybe towards the end. I know we have some questions that we're going to have to be answering. So, but before we move into that, I just want to address the mindset piece that we were talking about a moment ago.
Right.
And so I found this very effective explanation of the question, what do you want to be doing? What do you want to be doing during this period of time? So we can start out with what most people seem to begin with is what's called a fear zone. And this can be some examples of some of the thoughts that you might have. We also can be using these moments as a way to learn. What can I become aware of? How can I think about this differently?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we get into the growth mindset, I can look towards the future in a different way now without predicting, fear and dread, shock and awe. That was what we were talking about during 9/11.
Yeah. So one of the things that was I was kind of raised this way. I think it was the more Italian side of my heritage here with guilt. Okay. So I think one of the things also that enters into the mind and how because I definitely want to deal with this as well, is, a lot of us, we are healthy right now, but there are a lot of people that are not. There are a lot of us that have stability and there are a lot of people that don't. And for some, you feel guilty. I mean, that's the hard part too, is you want to help and you feel helpless in these situations. And how should we be feeling about that? Because it definitely could, that guilt could impact you and your family in many different ways.
Yeah, well, we should look at guilt in a different way. I mean, so, when I was a student, I heard this lecture and the professor said, guilt is self-chosen. Now, that was very confusing to me, being raised as an Italian, Catholic Italian. So there was a lot of guilt around when I was much younger. And so what I finally learned about what guilt being self-chosen meant, that if you have responsibility and you've acted irresponsibly, then guilt should be experienced. If you don't have responsibility but assume responsibility, you will feel guilt, and that's called irrational guilt.
Mm.
So, you know, when there was that tsunami years ago, people felt guilt, but you couldn't stop the tsunami. That would be irrational. We
Right.
could stop the COVID virus if we're not acting responsibly, if we're doing things by not keeping our physical distance. I don't like the term social distance. If we're not keeping our physical distance, then, and if somebody gets ill, if we pass it on to them and we bring it into our families, then you're acting in an irresponsible way. Now, the reason why people feel guilt, because associated with guilt is sadness and sorrow or remorse. You can feel sadness and sorrow and remorse. The remorse piece means that you're guilty. Sadness and sorrow are separate from feeling remorse.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel sad and sorrowful for what people are going through, but not feel responsible. So the issue is about, are you remorseful for things you don't have responsibility for? That's irrational guilt.
Okay.
So let's look at structuring the way you think. Do you literally have responsibility? And if you've acted irresponsibly, you should feel guilt. If you have no responsibility and feel guilt, that's irrational.
Okay. That's good. That's helpful. So I guess if we kind of use this chart that's up on the screen, and you do feel this, let's say you even have, you do have guilt, you want to help, be proactive is really what this chart would say, is I think of others and see how to help them. But I think one of the things too, Dr. Nick, that's very difficult now, I mean, we're tribal. I mean, it's in our innate buildup to want to be with other human beings. And right now, that could be putting someone else in danger. But how do you continue to have those types of connections? Because there's nothing like in-person connections. And what do we do now to sort of replace that feeling of connectivity?
It's an excellent point, Paul. You know, that the research has also told us that in addition to exercise, that a sense of belonging is critical in high levels of functioning. While we're in these positions where we're feeling so poorly, we're not spending as much time in a physical sense with others, but we can help, right? So with children, make sure that there's social interaction. A lot of kids are doing things like having those parades of birthday parties. So you drive by someone's, to celebrate their birthday, and it's their cars and fire engines and police departments.
I don't mean to interrupt you, so don't lose your thought, but that works, by the way, because my daughter had her 14th-year-old birthday on Sunday, and it was quite a surprise, and it was uplifting. I mean, I felt the best that I have in a long time. You know, just having that brief moment of that you did feel connected.
Yeah. Well, there's other ways to kind of corporately celebrate, right? So you saw the scenes in Italy where people on their balconies actually all singing. Yeah. I saw some people in New Jersey, and they're actually dancing on their front porches at a certain hour. Music is playing and people are dancing on their front porches. So there's a corporateness. We know that that actually helps us heal. So belonging only takes place through feeling understood. So when you reflect understanding to others, and being generous, giving to them, communicating, a lot of the visual interactions now with what goes on with FaceTime and Zoom will be very helpful. But making sure that we spend time every day trying to bring into our lives a sense of belonging with others, demonstrating understanding to our family members, to our friends, corporately celebrating faith, prayer, are very important in ways of helping us heal. So it's important to make sure we do this in a corporate way.
Okay, good. I like that. And what would you recommend for those of us that do have people that are looking to us for that type of guidance, for connectivity? What should our role be?
I always think asking questions are very effective ways of helping others, and asking questions that are what and how questions. What can I do to help? How can I help you? Versus why are you feeling the way you're feeling? We don't want to do any of that kind of stuff. Even as a psychologist, I don't always understand why people are doing what they're doing. And people that know me know that I make up stories if I don't have the answer. So we use the questions of what can I do to help? How can I help you? And when you do that, you're going to come up with process answers. Well, you know what you could do is you can smile. You can, send me a text message. You could ask me how my family's doing. So what and how questions are engaging because they're process oriented. That's what I would suggest that we do.
Right. So, like some of these emotions that we spoke about, and some are pretty clear to all of us that are experiencing those. But as this goes on, what are some of the things that perhaps we haven't talked about yet that we should be mindful of if they start to occur that are different than we normally perhaps would feel? And what are some of those threats, I guess, as we move along here that you feel could be a negative influence on our psyche?
I would say, just as we're getting ready to get into some of these questions here, is that we want to deal with truth, Paul. We don't want to just deal with perceptions. So frequently people will talk about the half full glass, and now people might be looking at it as the half empty glass. Most people don't know that there's a third answer. And the third answer is the truth. There's 4 ounces in an 8-ounce glass, 8 ounces in a 16-ounce glass. If you pay more attention to your perceptions, you might not see the truth. So the first line of defense, first of all, is manage the environment. And the best way to manage the environment with the stress that we're faced with is limit the amount of time that you're studying all the statistics about what's going on with COVID-19. I would definitely limit that, structure the environment around you, make it comfortable, and then I would look at things that are truth-bearing and not perceptions. Now, people are thinking things and feeling things and believing things. You know that our beliefs don't always tell us the truth, right?
Yep. Well, it took me a while to figure that out, but yes.
Yeah. Well, people go to war based upon what they believe, right? So just because you believe it doesn't make it true. And just because you feel it doesn't make it true. You might feel fear. It's only a feeling. You might have a thought. It's only a thought. Make sure that we're dealing with the truth and not just feelings and beliefs. We need to know what the truth is.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And that was something that I got from you, that building on that is definitely very, very helpful to see things in a way that are very clear by what they really are, not what you may think they are.
Right.
Yep. Well, let's turn over to some questions. We have a lot of questions that are coming in. One is, I think I get anxiety from my mother. She always suffers from it. Is it hereditary?
Excellent question. And the research to the answer is yes. So first of all, there's 6 different forms of anxiety, but there's one that we would describe as an inherent predisposition. And a study that was done went on for 50 years, followed children from 4 weeks after they were born for the next 50 years. And at 11 months, we could tell which children are be predisposed to anxiety. Now, if you are predisposed to anxiety, what that would then mean is that your thresholds would be lower. You would feel it with more intensity, and it might go on for a longer period of time. Some forms of anxiety are inherent, predisposed, and some are not, which are called state anxiety.
Okay.
So just before you take a test, just when you get into stressful situations, these are example of what's called state anxiety.
I see. So how do you sort of recommend someone that's feeling anxiety much more significantly now that we have this sort of pandemic crisis?
Well, understanding will really reduce that. So if it's a child and if a parent is now trying to help them understand, help the child understand that they understand that versus you shouldn't be anxious about things. Telling a person not to have an experience that they're having doesn't work. So comforting them. Actually, physical touch is very, very healing. Music is healing. What actually takes place in the brain when you hear some beautiful music, that can be helpful. Looking at visual sights, competing with negative thoughts, which anxiety is frequently based on, with positive images. So you can't have a negative thought and a positive image at the same time. So look at a beautiful beach scene. It's hard to have a negative thought and see that at the same time in your mind, in your brain, actually.
So at what point, as an individual, when you feel like you cannot control anxiety, what is that sort of time where it's like, I should reach out and get some help? Where is almost sort of manageable, controllable anxiety versus I don't think I'm in control of this right now?
I think that one's experience with that is important, but we need to differentiate between whether or not that's a belief I can't control it versus the truth. So some things that we would try to use to figure that out is to use breathing techniques, for example. So breathing from your diaphragm and not your thoracic area. When you breathe from your diaphragm, which is just below your rib cage, those of us who have children, when they were younger, you would go into the bedroom to make sure that their stomach was going up and down to make sure they were breathing correctly. So if
Yep.
you breathe like that slowly and allow the tension to flow out of your body, you might be able to switch the brain around. So I showed you that picture of the brain that was nice and blue and green.
Yes.
That
Yep.
was an example of breathing and being able to create images in your mind. That may give you a sense of comfort and more control. But
Yeah.
I would say that if it's protracted, if it's interfering with your sleep, your appetite, and irritability, it'd be time to reach out. And clearly, people should know that psychologists, social workers, mental health workers are able to practice telehealth medicine. So I'm
Okay.
still continue my clinical practice to see people, virtually.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll be helpful. I mean, one of the things that we will do after this discussion today, we'll send some stuff over, and in that we
Right.
should definitely include that because I think that's very helpful. And I think sometimes too that I think this is still, even though let's say anxiety and what anxiety is, and this acceptance of anxiety and other say mental challenges. I hate referring them sometimes as illnesses because there has been this sort of taboo way of dealing with that. It's like, whoa, 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 but if you have a cold or if your knee is damaged, you go and get it checked, and that's fine. But society has had a weird stigma around it. But it's good to see that I would say the past decade, there's much more in the way of acceptance of knowledge. I remember when I was younger and was having those episodes, I had no idea what it was, you know.
Right.
But so sometimes you can talk to other people about it and they're not understanding where you're coming from at all. So if they've never experienced it, they don't understand how frightful it really is. And what happens is that you almost start to think that, you are losing control, that you are nuts, and that's that downward spiral that it takes you.
Well, people sometimes confuse anxiety with mental illness. And I'd like to separate this out. So there's normal anxiety. The pandemic has produced a great deal of unrest and uncertainty about the future, which we're describing as part of what happens with anxiety. So people can have anxiety and not have a mental illness.
Yeah.
So there's very few people that I have treated, even in the course of all my years and my clinical work and residence, that were mentally ill. There were people that were having some stress reactions. Sometimes they're transient stress disorders. This could be an example of this.
Right.
9/11 produced a great deal of trauma. Some
Right.
people still have, post-traumatic stress. But
Right.
I think we'd like to look at this. What we're talking about today is kind of the normal anxiety, normal in the sense of being in a crisis at the moment. There's several factors that produce change, Paul, and coercion is one of them. We're being coerced into what we're having to do right now. It's not martial law, but it may feel like that. And when
Yeah.
things are taken away from us, we're feeling helpless. That can produce a sense of frustration, anger, anxiety. So we
Mhm.
need to look at a lot of what the experiences that's going on in our culture and in the world right now is a usual response to situations where we're losing control over. But
Right.
let's not confuse that anxiety then with mental illness. So during this period of time, certainly reach out to get some support, and you can get it from, professionals. Clearly, you can get it from clergy, or sometimes friends are good in terms of giving support, not advice.
I like that. You know what? That's very helpful. Another question, how do you keep a clear mental state when the outcome of this could be losing your business due to lack of financing of a company that you built, or even having the cash wherewithal to continue on, something that has been a great part of you for a while now? How do you do that?
Well, first of all, I think it's frightening to have a thought or perhaps even start to have the experience with that. But you know that there are people that have come from very, very unfortunate situations, and they have thrived. And so when we look back at that figure that I showed you before, this can be an opportunity to actually create anew. People have gone bankrupt. They've lost family members. People have come through the Holocaust. And even though they've come through some of these very, very terrible times, it can be inspirational. I don't mean to minimize the emotional stress, but it could be a factor that actually catapults a person into reinventing themselves.
I like that. Yeah, and I guess though, as as a person deals with that strain and stress, what are some of the ways, I guess, that could be an outlet? Because that is something that's wearing on you, and you have people that are counting on you as well. So it's not sometimes just what you've built, right? Which in and of itself is something that is of significance to our achievement, and losing that alone is very difficult to accept. And there's family consequences, and there are people that rely on you from a paycheck perspective.
Yeah.
So that's a great deal of strain that
Yeah. Well, anyone who's in a position of leadership, certainly we look at parents as one of those groups of leaders, right? And then in your position, as managing partner, in leadership, this is the time, particularly for being a parent and being a grandparent, to show our loved ones and people that may be in our employment that we are going to demonstrate as much security as possible.
Yeah.
And that these are opportunities, as I'm saying, to do that. But I would say that as a parent, the most important thing I think a parent can do now, and a leader can do, is to demonstrate that whatever it takes, you're going to follow through in making sure those things are taken care of. It's not best for us to be looking into the future. I understand that there's financial devastation that could occur, and certainly what it looks like is our government is trying to find a way to help us. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But we can't go looking forward too far into the future. That's what I showed you in that one graph. By doing that, we're going to create anxiety because there's not an answer. We need to be focused on one day at a time in order to get ourselves into the future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that one thing about the government and the assistance. We'll also include something in the follow-up email that we send out to our participants today. And again, thank you for joining and listening to us today. We do hope that we are a source of help, but we'll include in there programs that people could potentially benefit from, because there are some really good programs that the government has put out to help businesses right now. So we've been helping a lot of them take advantage of those. So we'll include that. One other thing, we talked about anxieties, we've talked about stresses, but people with OCD. So what's the best way to help an adult son with severe OCD prior to COVID to help him get out? But right now he's using COVID as an excuse for a bad time to start exercising and getting out and doing walks and stuff like that. So any advice you would have there?
Well, that's a very complicated situation. That the thresholds of people that have OCD, if it's a real OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and those disorders are brain-based. We're not just talking about habits that have been difficult for a person to change. So if it is truly an OCD condition, hopefully your child is receiving some services, and I would certainly drive you right back to as providing that for you. Those situations are, although they're urge-based, they're also based in the brain. And so the stress, the thresholds are now modified because of the amount of stress, and would not be a good time to try to force situations. I would certainly seek your professional's advice, but I would tell you to try to, the interpretation of that looks like it might be a way out. There might be a more clinical situation here. I'm not so sure I could answer without knowing more about the individual.
Yeah, understood. Okay. I like this question here because I think we're all relating to this now. We're 4 weeks into this, and positivity is wearing off, especially as there was another extension by the governor yesterday of another 30 days. My drug of choice has been comfort food, as it has been for many of us. There's nothing like a good snack eating on the couch at night. I've been good with dieting until yesterday. How do we push back in the temptation of our comfort crutch?
Well, I'll give you the very short version of this. It takes 3 days to 21 days to change a habit. If you can stop yourself from snacking for 3 minutes, the urge should go away. And if you do that, and if you're consistent over a period of time, you're going to see you're going to maintain more control. Now, if you start to rationalize that you deserve it because of all the stress you're under, that's not avoiding, what you should be avoiding is don't get into the impulse. Let 3 minutes go by. Drink a glass of water. It should start to curb that.
Yeah. With the economy in disarray, how do we help friends in a psychological and emotional level who have lost their job and have no income?
It's a very problematic situation, and I'm not a financial analyst here. What I'm going to say is support is one of the most important things. And when I talk about friendships, I always talk about friendships. The friends don't give advice; they give support.
Right.
And there's a big difference in those things. Now, support,
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
yeah, support might be in terms of finance, and I don't just mean patting someone on the head when you can get closer to people. I mean literally giving support, understanding, and telling people everything's going to be fine isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. Let's try to stay focused on the moment. People are much more creative, and when you look at what change can do in situations where there is some degree of stress, if you don't give into the stress, but you use this as a way to move yourself forward, you're going to probably come up with some pretty creative ways to resolve these issues.
Yeah, I think if we could just go a little bit deeper on that support as a friend, what is sort of good support versus not great support?
Yeah. When you look at friendships, you can have a friend, and I give this example. I play golf with guys I probably wouldn't have lunch with. I'd have lunch with guys I probably wouldn't have dinner with. I have dinner with guys I wouldn't invite to my house. My wife can make a nice Italian dinner.
We call that it was the beer test.
The beer
test. Through more than one beer with someone.
Yeah. And then there's a guy I'm going to tell my life story to. But when you look at friendships, there are two people. The interaction is the relationship. The relationship is like an infant. Now, human infants are the most helpless of all species in the world, right? Yeah. They fail to thrive unless they're cared for. The relationship has to be cared for. That caring is done through support. It's not necessarily given advice. Do what's best for the relationship. Be there, listen, kind gestures, demonstration of caring behaviors with frequency, reaching out, communicating, sending a note, a phone call. That support is very, very powerful. It adds to the sense of human belonging, which is the basis for thriving in the world.
So just to touch one more time on the whole advice thing. So about giving advice as a friend.
Yeah, the problem with advice giving is I might be giving advice to you, Paul. We're friends. I might give advice to you that's best for me. I don't know if it's best for you. So the only way that you can actually give very, very good advice is to be empathic. Now, people can be sensitive. Oh, I feel sorry for your loss. That's a sensitive response.
Right.
An empathic response is, what's it like for Paul to have lost his job, to have lost his loved one? That requires a very empathic response. And a lot of times advice giving is sensitivity. Let me tell you what I would do if I were in that situation. It doesn't mean you're really doing that. Yeah. You have to be extremely empathic to give great advice. Let's start with support first. If you're going to give advice, do it from behind the other person's eyes. Walk in their shoes, not what you think it is. You have to have that experience.
So what do you say to those who are particularly on edge emotional from being home with 24/7, being home 24/7 with a child.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go back to this whole thing around scheduling. And if you're a single parent, it's going to be extremely difficult. If you're married and your partner's not really helping out, well, that's another story. But we would,
That's a whole series on that one.
yeah, no, we'll be doing webinars for the rest of our careers here. So what I'd be saying is that you need to schedule time. You need to schedule time on task. You need to vary the routine with frequency. I know a lot of families are doing more things together than they ever have. They're putting puzzles together, doing crossword puzzles, watching movies, taking walks. This is a time to make sure that everybody is sharing the burden of this. But let's do this in a scheduled way.
Okay.
Take breaks, make sure there's pleasure. Music is a good way to experience pleasure, doing some artwork, building, doing some activities together.
Yeah, we have a question. It's almost associated with that guilt concept that I was talking about, I'm trying to stay positive and I have a positive attitude and I want to demonstrate positivity, but I don't want to come across as insensitive. So what's your advice there?
First of all, I think we need to be real. This is a stressful time. Explaining that you're stressed or explaining that you're hurt or anxious or worried is fine.
Right.
I don't know that putting on a happy face, this came up in another webinar I had done. If you put on a happy face, is that going to make other people happy? Well, if you're being disingenuine, then it's not going to work. Let's be authentic. There's a sadness about this, but there's also life ahead.
Yeah.
So it's really about where we place our attention, right? So our attention has to be driven towards what's essential. And I've given this example before, Paul. You can read a paragraph and not remember what you read.
Right.
And if I said to you, read this new paragraph, but I want you to find the two most important points, you would read it differently. If I intend on being caring towards other and I'm authentic, that's going to come across. If I'm intending, Paul, tell me about your struggles and I'm not really listening to you, there's no benefit. It's actually going to be worse. Your intention should drive your attention. So if you want to be caring and supportive, be authentic and do that. Don't just say it and not mean it and not behave it.
I got it. So just going back, and again, we know this is a whole series that we could discuss these types of issues, but there are many dual working parents with kids around, and they're doing their distance learning as well. And the two parents are trying to also do their job. So what's your advice for that couple that has to deal with that stress?
I think it's going to vary, even in the advice giving, I think it's going to vary depending upon the age of the children and the interactions between parents. I mean, some parents are complaining they don't know how to do the schoolwork.
Yeah.
And that they're actually
another new math, that's for sure.
They're calling in tutors, which I think is not such a bad idea, and that tutors can be available. And if you need any assistance, speak with me. I'll be able to help you with some tutors. But I think being able to delegate responsibilities and have the shared responsibilities and time on task is critical. So 20 minutes of schoolwork might be a lot for the child and for the parent, or 20 minutes of the parent being there as well. So I would say structure the time.
Okay.
And go through this in short periods of time, 20 minutes on, 5 or 10 minutes off, 20 minutes on, and go do a different activity.
Right.
You can't do this all at once. And so sort of like in that metaphor of all that smoke coming together, and you can't really separate things out. You have to separate out the responsibilities, times on tasks, exercise, pleasurable experiences. Go through that on a daily basis, but continuously varying that. Just don't do one thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I also think like over communicate is the better default mechanism in this environment. Just to set those expectations. I mean, even we've had to try and do more of that, I would say, at WIS. One of the things that I feel that we've done really well with over the years is provide very empowered culture, one in which people can have more power over the way in which they work and when they work and how they work. But under these sort of conditions, it's definitely different, because there are people that are in the organization, and if they're, just starting out, they need direction, they need guidance, and normally you could walk over to your neighbor and find that out. But if they're not hearing from someone above, they don't feel, they may not feel that they have any way of measuring, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I doing well? Am I not doing well? I feel disconnected. That communication and expectation is huge.
It's critical. I know we're going to be doing some more of these, and today we're planning on doing some more about the work at home. I think in the next opportunity, we're going to spend more time because there's some very interesting research about that, and actually the difference between males and females working and males and females working from home. We'll spend some more time maybe being more specific about that the next time we do this.
Okay. Another question for you. I have never been on treatment for anxiety, but is it normal to feel muscle stress and feel like you can't breathe?
Unfortunately, yes, there's the autonomic response. So I'll give you a simple example. If right now I ask you to imagine a piece of fruit in your mouth, something juicy, tangerine, watermelon, a nice hot day sitting outside, or a juicy steak, you're going to start to salivate. And once that happens, it'll take you about 3 minutes to stop. When you become anxious, if you don't catch the anxiety within 90 seconds, it will go on for 3 to 7 minutes. Your brain functioning will change. And typically the response of tension is actually from your jaw radiating up the back of your head, down your shoulders, and across the chest, the thoracic region. You will have difficulty breathing because the muscles will tense up. You need to breathe from your diaphragm. But the answer to that is yes. That autonomic response can be changed. It'd be great if you can catch it before it occurs. If you catch it in the first 90 seconds and have a nice pleasant image, start breathing from your diaphragm, you'll see that that will be reducing the tension up in this area. Do not try to breathe deeply. That's a wrong.
Yeah, so can you give an example of that, like that breathing from the diaphragm, what that would feel like?
Yeah, if you start becoming anxious, you try to breathe up here, you're going to compress your chest muscles and you will have difficulty breathing. People start to hyperventilate. So there's a region just below your rib cage called your diaphragm. Mm-hmm. If you place your hand on that, imagine that there's a balloon right in that section of your body. Breathe in through your nose and try to inflate that portion of your body. If you do that correctly, your shoulders won't even move. As you bring the breath in, hold your breath and breathe out through your mouth and let your body relax. If you do that for 3 minutes, your breathing will come under control. You should be fine.
Okay. Another question for you. In the government order yesterday, they're starting to close a lot of parks and playgrounds and other recreational paths that we normally exercise around. What suggestions do you have now? It's almost as though they're telling us we shouldn't be outside at all.
Well, I don't want to go against any orders, so I'll tell you my understanding about this. My understanding is that one of the reasons why they closed the parking lots was to make sure there was a reduction of people gathering all together. I know people are still taking areas of paths that they can walk on, but it's certainly depreciating the number of people. I understand that they don't want kids playing and, they're taking down basketball hoops so that people aren't doing that. So I know this is part of what I was saying before about feeling coerced. You have to find ways that are creative to find a place to walk, but you can't do that where there's other people. I don't want going against any governmental orders, but I think that there's ways that you can probably exercise. And I'll just give you this one example. The Greeks used to say, walk amongst the lilies. Now, when the Greeks were saying that, they weren't saying that just to walk. They were saying exercise your senses. Become aware of things that you're seeing. This is what mindfulness is about. Become aware of what you're feeling, a cool breeze. Become aware of the sunlight. And you can exercise your mind and brain that way, not only exercising your body. That's another thing that you can do. Sit on your front porch and try to become aware of things you were not aware of before.
I see. Yeah, so we have just a few minutes left here, Dr. Nick. Are there things that you'd want to share with us all that perhaps we haven't covered, or that you'd want to, make sure that you highlight a few things?
The best thing I can tell you is you really should compartmentalize things that you're thinking about on a daily basis. Shift your attention around to things that are not disruptive. Try to find pleasurable experiences. I don't mean to ignore the truth about what's going on. There will be a way through this. We're going to survive. We're going to be more than surviving, be thriving. That mindset isn't just like there, everything is fine. A growth mindset allows us to see this as an opportunity to push ourselves through. Our country has survived, has thrived on that kind of mentality. It wasn't easy. Any of the countries or that have come to the United States or first generation have gone through a number of these things. So please keep that in mind. And I can't stress enough, if you need assistance, please reach out to mental health professionals. They are available. I'm not trying to get my business up here. You're waiting to get some service.
And it wouldn't be taken that way, yeah.
Yeah, make sure you speak to people that can be supportive.
Yeah, I think that's real important in today's environment, is being able to know there are resources out there for those to help you, and whether that is on the stress side and helps get someone to help manage that stress or that anxiety, as well as also financial advice and guidance.
Yes.
There are, as I said and mentioned before, and I want to highlight that's a real important source of emotional distress right now. But there are programs that could help make it a little bit less burdensome. It was not a complete solution, they aren't. So there's no sort of panacea here that the government has put out that, okay, it's going to cure all your financial woes, but they are trying to have a package out there that helps you get from point A to point B, and hopefully that will help others feel a little bit better about that. So, okay. I just want to mention lastly, I think we did have one more question. I'm just going to see if I can get this. Let's see. So, Dr. Nick, my daughter is supposed to be going to college in the fall. It is stressful financially to begin with, but now we are trying to see how this all may work out and adjust what our expectation may be for how we're going to pay for this. They're scared and they're anxious now, and how this relates to their outbound senior incoming college student. How do you best offer advice for them?
As a parent, anyone who's giving advice, you don't have to prove the decisions that you're going to be making. We are going to have to make some decisions that are not going to be easy because of what's going on financially for the family and as well as for the student. There's nothing wrong with postponing that for maybe a semester or attending a school closer to home. There will be emotions around this, but we can't make our decisions just based upon what we feel. Mm-hmm. We have to make decisions that are reasonable, financially prudent, health-based, things that are beyond just the way we feel. And this will sound strange. Feelings are overrated. And what I mean by that, you're probably surprised to hear that a psychologist say that feelings get us in trouble all the time. We think things that are true, believe things that are true, and feel things that are true that are not. Children might be afraid of the darkness. To turn the lights on, they're fine. Turn the lights off, they're not. Feelings don't always tell us the truth, and feelings aren't always the best way to make decisions. We have to be financially sound during this period of time. There will be another day.
Okay, very well said. And thank you, Dr. Nick. We're going to get ready to close here, but and this has been extremely helpful, Dr. Nick. Thank you for your time. One of the things that we do want to put out there, and again, it'll be included in a follow-up email. We have established the Lexi Fay Everyone Matters Foundation, and for those of you that, again, I think if we look towards that growth mindset right now and do want to help, we're trying to be as proactive as we can in purchasing hard-to-get medical supplies for the front line, for the hospitals, for the workers, and also there are a bunch of people right now that are having a hard time just finding daily meals. So we're asking you, no obligation, but we will be sending this out. All proceeds that we will raise will go towards those efforts. So again, thank you everyone for joining here today. And thank you again, Dr. Nick, for spending this valuable time with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Best to all.